Hello. We're going to continue reading Wonder. We are on page 15. Paging Mr. Tushman. Where we left off, Augie and his family were talking about going to meet with the principal, Mr. Tushman, and they were making jokes about his name and a previous teacher that I believe his mom had. But he agreed to go talk to the new principal and the possibility of going to a actual school since he's been homeschooled. So paging Mr. Tushman. I would have been more nervous about meeting Mr. Tushman if I'd known I was going to be meeting some kids from the new school. If I'd known I was also going to be meeting some kids from the new school. But I didn't know, so if anything, I was kind of giggly. Couldn't stop thinking about all the jokes Daddy had made about Mr. Tushman's name. So when me and Mom arrived at Beecher Prep a few weeks before the start of school, and I saw Mr. Tushman standing there, waiting for us at the entrance, I started giggling right away. He didn't look at all like what I had pictured, though. I guess I thought he would have a huge butt, but he didn't. In fact, he was a pretty normal guy, tall and thin. Old, but not really old. He seemed nice. He shook my mom's hand first. Hi, Mr. Tushman. So nice to see you again, said Mom. This is my son, August. Mr. Tushman looked right at me and smiled and nodded. He put his hand up for me to shake. Hi, August, he said, totally normally. It's a pleasure to meet you. Hi, I mumbled, dropping my hand into his hand while I looked down at his feet. He was wearing red Adidas. So, he said, kneeling down in front of me, so I couldn't look at his sneakers but had to look at his face. Your mom and dad have told me a lot about you. Like, what have they told you, I asked. Sorry? Honey, you have to speak up, said Mom. Like what? I said. I asked, trying not to mumble. I admit, I have a bad habit of mumbling. Well, that you like to read, said Mr. Tushman, and that you're a great artist. He had blue eyes with white eyelashes. And you're in science, right? Into science, right? I said, nodding. We have a couple of great science electives at Beecher's, he said. Maybe you could take one of them. Electives are classes in middle school that you take that are like special classes. You get to usually choose them. So you elect them, like musics, maybe computers, that kind of stuff. I said, though I had no idea what an elective was. See, I'm so, gosh. So are you ready to take a tour? You mean we're doing that now, I said. Did you think we were going to the movies, he answered, smiling as he stood up. You didn't tell me you were taking a tour, I said to Mom in my accusing voice. Augie, she started to say. It'll be fine, August, said Mr. Tushman, holding his hand out to me. I promise. I think he wanted me to take his hand, but I took Mom's instead. He smiled and started walking toward the entrance. Mommy gave my hand a little squeeze, though. I don't know if it was an I love you squeeze or an I'm sorry squeeze. Probably a little of both. The only school I'd ever been inside before was Via's, when I went with Mom and Dad to watch Via sing in the spring concerts and stuff like that. This school was very different. It was smaller. It smelled like a hospital. Nice Mrs. Garcia. We followed Mr. Tushman down a few hallways. There weren't a lot of people around, and the few people who were there didn't seem to notice me at all, though they may have been because they didn't see me. I sort of hid behind Mom as I walked. I know that sounds kind of babyish of me, but I wasn't feeling very brave right then. We ended up in a small room with the words Office of the Middle School Director on the door. Inside, there was a desk with a nice-seeming lady sitting behind it. This is Mrs. Garcia, said Mr. Tushman, and the lady smiled at Mom and took off her glasses and got up out of her chair. My mom shook her hand and said, Isabel Pullman, nice to meet you. And this is August, Mr. Tushman said. Mom kind of stepped to the side of it so I would move forward. Then that thing happened that I've seen happen a million times before. When I looked up at her, Mrs. Garcia's eyes dropped for a second. It was so fast no one else would have noticed since the rest of her face stayed exactly the same. She was smiling, a really shiny smile. Such a pleasure to meet you, August, she said, holding out for her hand for me to shake. Hi, I said quietly, giving her my hand, but I didn't want to look at her face, so I kept staring at her glasses, which hung from a chain around her neck. Wow, what a firm grip, said Mrs. Garcia. Her hand was really warm. The kid's got a killer handshake, Mr. Tushman agreed, and everyone laughed above my head. You can call me Mrs. G, Mrs. Garcia said. I think she was talking to me. But I was looking at all this stuff on her desk now. That's what everyone calls me. Mrs. G. I forgot my combination. Mrs. G. I need a late pass. Mrs. G. I want to change my elective. Mrs. G is actually the one who runs this place, said Mr. Tushman, which again made all the grown-ups laugh. I'm here every morning by 7:30, Mrs. Garcia continued, still looking at me while I stared at her brown sandals with small purple flowers on the buckles. So if you ever need anything, August, I'm the one to ask, and you can ask me anything. Okay, I mumbled. Oh, look at that cute baby, Mom said, pointing to one of the photographs on Mrs. Garcia's bulletin board. Is he yours? No, my goodness, said Mrs. Garcia, smiling a big smile now. That was totally different from her shiny smile. You've just made my day. He's my grandson. What a cutie, said Mom, shaking her head. How old? In that picture, he was 5 months, I think, but he's big now, almost 8 years old. Wow, said Mom, nodding and smiling. Well, he is absolutely beautiful. Thank you, said Mrs. Garcia, nodding like she was about to say something else about her grandson. But then all of a sudden, her smile got a little smaller. We're all going to take very good care of August, she said to Mom, and I saw her give Mom's hand a little squeeze. I looked at Mom's face, and that's when I realized she was just as nervous as I was. I guess I liked Mrs. Garcia when she wasn't wearing her shiny smile. Jack, Will, Julian, and Charlotte. I'm going to guess that maybe these are people that he meets at the school, since the last chapter was Nice Mrs. Garcia. We followed Mr. Tushman into a small room across from Mrs. Garcia's desk. She was talking as he closed the door to his office and sat down behind his big desk, though I wasn't really paying much attention to what he was saying. I was looking around at all the things on his desk. Cool stuff, like a globe that floated in the air and a Rubik's type cube made with little mirrors. I liked his office a lot. I liked that there was all these neat little drawings and paintings by students on the walls, framed like they were important. Mom sat down in a chair in front of Mr. Tushman's desk, and even though there was another chair right next to hers, I decided to stand beside her. Why do you have your own room and Mrs. G doesn't? I said. You mean, why do I have an office? Asked Mr. Tushman. You said she runs the place, I said. Oh, well, I was kind of kidding. Mrs. G is my assistant. Mr. Tushman is the director of the middle school, Mom explained. Do they call you Mr. T? I asked, which made him smile. Do you know who Mr. T is? He answered. I pity the fool, he said in a funny, tough voice, like he was imitating someone. I had no idea what he was talking about. Mr. T is a person that he wears really thick gold chains, and he's on a lot of commercials. You'd probably recognize him if you saw him. Anyway, no, said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. No one calls me Mr. T, though I have a feeling I'm called a lot of other things I don't know about. Let's face it, a name like mine is not so easy to live with. You know what I mean? Here I have to admit I totally laughed because I knew exactly what he meant. My mom and dad had a teacher called Miss Butt, I said. Augie, said Mom, but Mr. Tushman laughed. Now that's bad, said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. I guess I shouldn't complain. Hey, so listen, August. Here's what I thought we would do today. Is that a pumpkin? I said, pointing to a framed painting behind Mr. Tushman's desk. Augie, sweetie, don't interrupt, said Mom. You like it? Said Mr. Tushman, turning around and looking at the painting. I do too, and I thought it was a pumpkin too, until the student who gave it to me explained that it was actually not a pumpkin. It is, are you ready for this? A portrait of me. Now, August, I ask you, do I really look that much like a pumpkin? No, I answered, though I was thinking yes. Something about the way his cheeks puffed out when he smiled made him look like a jack-o'-lantern. Just as I thought that, it occurred to me how funny that was. Cheeks, Mr. Tushman, and I started laughing a little. I shook my head and covered my mouth with my hand. Mr. Tushman smiled like he could read my mind. I was about to say something else, but then all of a sudden I heard other voices outside the office. Kids' voices. I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but my heart literally started beating like I had just run the longest race in the world. The laughter I had inside me just poured out of me. The thing is, when I was little, I never minded meeting new kids because all the kids I met were really little too. What's cool about really little kids is they don't say stuff to try to hurt your feelings, even though sometimes they do say stuff that hurts your feelings. But they don't actually know what they're saying. Big kids, though, they know what they're saying, and that is definitely not fun for me. One of the reasons I grew my hair long last year was that I like how the bangs cover my eyes. It helps me block out the things I don't want to see. So I'm thinking he's nervous because he doesn't want to meet the mean kids, or he doesn't want to see the kids just in case they are mean. Mrs. Garcia knocked on the door and poked her head inside. They're here, Mr. Tushman, she said. Who's here? I said. Thanks, Mr. Tushman, said Mr. Tushman to Mrs. Garcia. August, thought it'd be a good idea for you to meet some kids who will be in your homeroom this year. I figure they could take you around the school a bit, show you the lay of the land, so to speak. I don't want to meet anyone, I said to Mom. Mr. Tushman was suddenly right in front of me, his hands on my shoulders. He leaned down and said very softly in my ear, It'll be okay, August. These are nice kids, I promise. You're going to be okay, Augie, Mom whispered with all of her might. Before she could say anything else, Mr. Tushman opened the door to his office. Come on in, kids, he said, and in walked two boys and a girl. None of them looked over at me or Mom. They stood over the door, looking straight at Mr. Tushman like their lives depended on it. Thanks so much for coming, guys, especially since school doesn't start until next month, said Mr. Tushman. Have you had a good summer? All of them nodded, but no one was saying anything. Great, said Mr. Tushman. So, guys, I wanted you to meet August. He's going to be a new student here this year. August, these guys have been students at Beecher Prep since kindergarten, though, of course, they were in the lower school building, but they know all the ins and outs of the middle school program. And since you're all in the same homeroom, I thought it would be nice if you got to know each other a little bit before school started, okay? So, kids, this is August. August, this is Jack Will. Jack Will looked at me and put out his hand. When I shook it, he kind of half smiled and said, Hey. And I looked down really fast. This is Julian, said Mr. Tushman. Hey, said Julian, and did the exact same thing as Jack Will. Took my hand, forced a smile, looked down fast. And Charlotte, said Mr. Tushman. Charlotte had the blondest hair I'd ever seen. She didn't shake my hand, but she gave me a quick little wave and smiled. Hi, August. Nice to meet you, she said. Hi, I said, looking down. She was wearing bright green Crocs. So, Mr. Tushman, putting his hand together in a kind of slow clap, what I thought you guys could do is take August on a little tour of the school. Maybe you could start on the third floor. That's where your homeroom class is going to be. Room 301. I think Mr. G is. Room 301, Mrs. Garcia called out from the other room. Room 301. Mr. Tushman nodded, and then you can show August the science labs and the computer room. Then work your way down to the library and the performance space on the second floor. Take him to the cafeteria, of course. Should we take him to the music room? Asked Julian. Good idea, yes, said Mr. Tushman. August, do you play any instruments? No, I said. It wasn't my favorite subject on account of the fact that I don't really have ears. Well, I do, but they don't exactly look like normal ears. Well, you may enjoy seeing the music room anyway, said Mr. Tushman. We have a very nice selection of percussion instruments. August, you've been wanting to learn to play the drums, Mom said, trying to get me to look at her, but my eyes were covered by my bangs as I stared at a piece of old gum that was stuck to the bottom of Mr. Tushman's desk. Great. Okay, so why don't you guys get going, said Mr. Tushman. Just be back here in, he looked at Mom. Half an hour, okay? I think, Mom nodded. So is that okay with you, August, he asked me. I didn't answer. Is that okay, August? Mom repeated. I looked at her now. I wanted her to see how mad I was at her. But then I saw her face and just nodded. She seemed more scared than I was. The other kids had started out the door, so I followed them. See you soon, Mom said, her voice sounding a little higher than normal. I didn't answer her. That's where we'll stop. Page 24. All right. See you next time.